time. All right.
Give me a second, Andre. We've got some technical difficulties. I'm going to have to change a little bit here before we get going.
All right. Look, if there weren't technical difficulties, I'd be concerned. The way technology goes today, I'm not concerned. I'm not concerned. Uh, but while we're working on that, folks, just want to say we have a really wonderful conversation today. We're going to talk a little bit and do a deep dive into our accelerator program and kind of talk about some of the things that we're seeing in the wider world, particularly as it relates to racism. Like there's some amazing stuff happening uh, in Tennessee right now, right? Like who would have thought that Tennessee would have been the the hotbed of the civil rights uh, of modern day, or the center of these kind of conversations. And I I think it's really interesting the way that, and Laura, let's talk about this first
Yeah,
before we
go for
get
it.
into our session. But I want to talk a little bit about like how institutional racism manifests itself as decorum,
Mm.
right? Or as the ways that we do things can sometimes be actual systemic racism manifest as this thing. So when you think about institutional racism, or when you address it in your practice, how do you define that, and how do you address it, and then we'll apply it to kind of this the conundrum that Tennessee finds itself in.
Yeah, I think let's be for me. I've always talked about it as diversity and the anti-racism or racism work as two kind of distinct and almost separate things, right? They
Yep.
support one another, but let's be clear that some organizations are not ready to do the anti-racism work, and some organizations are ready. So we've got to be clear. And some organizations are, doing your traditional diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging work that we've been talking about here. And so I just want to distinguish the difference between the two, where for me, diversity is about all of us, is about every single one of us, the differences, the similarities that we bring, our differences and similarities about education, our professional experiences, our personal family lives, our whatever those things are that we bring into the organization. Though that's all diversity, right? And traditional diversity work is focused on that piece around how do we make sure that all of that works together. And that's why the importance of the inclusion work and the outcome of belonging. The work focused on anti racism or racism to me is really just that. It is a hyper focus on the systemic racism. You talked about that. You brought that up. The systemic racism that exists within the organizations and what we can do to address the disparities between race, right? And most often, when we look at our systems, it is the disparities between black and white and black and others in the systems. For me, we've talked about this, and we can certainly talk about this on another call and another talk conversation, but deeper. But the model minority thing, we'll talk about another time. But if we take a look at historically, if we're able to disaggregate your data within your institutions, if you're able to disaggregate the policies and or take a deep dive into the policies and practices within your institutions, you will find that there will be unintentional consequences broken down by race because of your systems and the way they have been set up. And so it is a look at the system and the racism that exists there, not and beyond the we need to create an inclusive environment for everyone where everyone feels like they belong. And so that to me is the difference, distinguishing difference, the difference between the two. I don't know, Andre, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think it is important to make the distinction between the two, right? So a lot of times the work of diversity and inclusion and belonging and equity, right? Not to forget
Correct.
equity, is what can happen within the walls of my organization. What's the responsibility to make sure that things are aligned in such a way that we're able to fulfill our mission,
Yep.
right? Um, which sometimes can be complicated, or even sometimes confused with the external work of talking about systemic oppression and,
Yep.
and what. And so one of the things that I wanted to kind of dabble in our conversation is like how uh, those inequities within our own systems, right? And I'm not talking about the broader social stuff, but
Sure.
even in our own organizations, we can have these trappings that we say that have unintended consequences,
Hmm.
right? Um, so like um, extroverts they obviously get heard more often than introverts. Well, there's some unintended consequences to a leader or to an organization that doesn't say, okay, let's make whether someone's an introvert or an extrovert an equitable opportunity for leadership,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So the
Or even
unintended
even sorry,
consequences.
even not
Go
even
ahead.
leadership programs or leadership. I'm talking. I think what even let's take it down to your team meetings, right, or your brainstorming sessions. How do we make sure that your introverts are also heard in team meetings and brainstorming sessions? And I've been in many brainstorming sessions. I am an introvert, and I've been in those sessions where it's like, well, we're going to talk about let's brainstorm on this particular idea. Anybody have an idea? And guess who shouts out their ideas first? It's the extroverts, right?
Right.
And then folks like me, oh yeah, that kind of relates to my ideas. So I'm going to sit back and I'm going to be quiet because that kind of sounds like mine already. But
Yep.
then by the end of that meeting, it's like the leader then will turn around and say, "Well, Laura, why didn't you say anything?"
Right.
Well, right. And so I think, sorry to jump in there, but I think that that inclusive environment is, to your point, it is about creating a space for all voices to be heard. And I think that's I think where you were going to with this is the difference in the nuance between that space of inclusion and really being intentional about the equity and moving into the racism, anti-racism work.
Yep. And to be honest, if we are acting inclusively and we're thoughtful, even in that team meeting,
Yeah.
that is anti-racist without ever having
Yeah.
to really get into the deep philosophies or approaches,
Yeah.
right? So just being mindful can help us address some of these systemic um, unintended, oftentimes unintended consequences that show up as racism, discrimination, and disparities,
You
right?
mean systems weren't built to say, if you're not white, you can't exceed in this organization?
You know what? People could argue that, right? But what I would say is that most often organizations are built
Yeah.
for, and I like using the word instead of businesses or corporations, I like organisms, right? So
Mm-hmm.
organizations, because it is a living, breathing, because there are people a part of it
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
and we have to treat it as such. And so it's an organism's best interest is its own interest.
Yeah.
An organization's best interest is the organization's best interest. Whether people are a consideration or not is up to the people within that system to be mindful of those things. And so when I think about like the Tennessee Three or the Expelled Two, um, I think I think about like organizations and how sometimes we can use our policies as weapons
Yeah.
as opposed to tools of accountability,
Yeah. So talk
right?
more about that. Weapons versus tools accountability.
Yeah, so when we weaponize, we are excluding people, right? So when a policy or a procedure gets um, is applied sometimes evenly or unevenly, but has different outcomes for different people, then that's a challenge for us. That's something we need
Yeah.
to kind of take into account. And the difference is when we're holding people accountable, we're saying this is the line, and we'll take into consideration your the uniqueness that you bring to what this rule is, as
Yeah.
opposed to saying this is the rule and you will be punished by it without taking consideration of what brought people to the fact that we have to use this rule. you know?
So I think a great example you and I both are familiar with is in the education system, right? Behavior, emotional behavior disorder or EBD programs, historically has been seen as problematic in its application
Yep.
due to some the way that it's been implemented, but I think some of it is due to bias as well, right? And so, for those of you who are listening who may not be familiar, there's been historical research that's been shown that emotional behavioral programs are historically have been targeting young black boys that get targeted and enrolled in EBD programs because oftentimes the bias of white teachers who may not have be familiar with behaviors that are the norm for some of these kids see it as threatening, see it as overly aggressive, see it as you name it, and then these kids often get tracked into EBD programs, right? That is a great example for me of the unintentional consequences and the uh, of the programs or policies in which and procedures in which we put in place in education that is meant to be for all, right? But the bias of the teachers, the bias of the social workers, the bias of the counselors, the bias of whoever else comes into play, and the unintentional consequences or outcomes of that is that historically young black boys get tracked into EBD programs.
Yep. And the same with with their medication,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because to and we also see that with health disparities around asthma,
Mm-hmm.
right? So asthma is one of these things that in poorer populations, for whatever reason, we could talk about that on another show as well. There the severity of asthma seems to be greater in certain economic levels in our society than in other economic levels.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that there's not, but the severity of uh, the attacks or the treatments vary according to socioeconomic status. And so, is that an inherent thing? And I would say that it is not. That it is actually part of a systemic piece. So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah, we can certainly talk about the social determinants of health at another call
yeah,
and
yeah,
what organizations, what you and I have been able to do to help organizations, healthcare systems start to address those things, right? So we can certainly talk about that at another call. But the Tennessee case, you talked about Tennessee being surprisingly this kind of model, if you will, of the modern you said modern civil
yeah.
rights.
Or a modern. I mean, it's one of those landmark pieces
Sure.
that will go down in history as profound.
So for
And
those who haven't been following, why don't you share a little bit?
yeah, so there were three legislators who were in supporting the community
Mm-hmm.
um, in a peaceful demonstration uh, on gun activism.
Yep.
And so these legislators had experienced a number of microaggressions, and that's it'll be interesting for us to hear more about what those look like.
Yep.
But and so in some of their statements, they've talked about some of those microaggressions, right?
Yep.
So like having their mics turned off during the middle of talking, and it's still their time, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we recognize that decorum says we'll use a certain amount of time, and so if you use your time, you're good. But having their mics cut off, being ignored when questions are being raised, and all of these kinds of things. And so we I hope we recognize that behaviors don't just come out of nowhere; they come out of a context. And so um, these three lawmakers were demonstrating with lawful and appropriate demonstrations with community members, and they were said to be out of order, and two of them were expelled. They happened to be three three folks who were of the minority party
Yeah.
in the house, and two of them happened to be black. So the third person was not expelled, um, and the two young black men were, but are currently reinstated as the temporary representatives from their respective districts until a special election can be had, where there is some belief that they will probably be reelected to their expelled posts. So
What's interesting is the other uh, legislative officers who have done things that have been way worse are still holding seats, and or even in some cases are in leadership roles,
yeah,
right? And that's, to me, that's sickening. And it is an example of when people see these things, and what's the difference, right? We've talked about this personally a number of times. It's like, what's the difference between these two cases? It boils down to, sometimes race. And to your point earlier, sometimes it's those unintentional consequences. But in some cases, like in this case, to me, um, it is. It was not unintentional. It was not done blindly for me. There were some intentional things that were done, and why these moves were made to silence those two young black legislative officers in those seats, in those districts. So,
yeah. Yeah, but people want deniability, right?
yeah.
So it's the rule. It's the we've always had this rule,
That doesn't
about,
apply equally across, though.
but we haven't always applied the
Correct.
right. And so when and why? How do we choose to apply to certain things but not apply it to other things? Is always uh, a point of contention, and something we should think about. And but enough on that. I want to get to a little bit of kind of talking about our accelerator program,
Yep.
right? So I don't know if people have noticed, but we've touched on a number of the core pieces to this accelerator program, and our effort is not to replace any DEI leaders in any particular organization, but to support them, right? So we hold these conversations weekly so that we can support DEI leaders who are currently doing the work, and
I'm going to
encourage.
work on getting this up. You
Okay.
keep
And,
talking.
yep. And so we want to encourage them through our support. So through our over between the two of us 40 years of experience um, in this space, we want to create these opportunities for us to learn and grow together. So um, I'm really excited because we've kind of talked about this the hands, the head, the heart, and the what was the fourth H, Laura?
Heels.
And
How do you
heels,
actually
right?
walk it out?
All right.
So,
So we've kind of talked about that. We've talked a little bit about making sure that when you are working with folks, that you move in accordance to a change management model, and it doesn't necessarily um, you don't have to use one in particular, right? We have one that we like to use,
yeah.
but as long as you're approaching this from a change management perspective, it allows you to not only uh, gather information where you currently are, but also let folks know where you're going in the journey, so that they can come alongside you as you develop and build your program and get that program maximized.
Yeah. So let me do this, and we can certainly talk about each of these, Andre.
Wonderful.
Um, and let's see. I think I've got this going. Yeah, move. I just need to. We've got some technical issues here this week, y'all.
Yeah, no, it's all good. And there it is. It's just a little bit behind, but I
Yeah.
see it.
All right. So, the DEIB Accelerator Program is meant to. Andre talked a little bit about this. Is meant to help individuals who are doing this work, this important work of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging within their organizations. And our aim is, and we recognize, and because we've been there, we've been the sole person leading this work, or one of two or three leading this work. That sometimes, and some of this may be, true to some of you listening, is sometimes your role is buried under HR or legal or whatever function that you are sitting in, and you have to work through influence, right? And so this DIB Accelerator program is really focused on how do we help you, the DIB practitioner, be the best and most effective that you can be. Okay. Um, and the first few pages that we'll walk you through here is available for you to download, and I can certainly put it in the. We'll certainly put it in the Facebook group if you aren't following us yet. Put it in the Facebook group. We'll also put it in the YouTube channel, and you can go and download it from there as well. But this DIB practitioner or a accelerator program really is focused on a couple of different things, right? This is I will skip all of this because it just talks about preparing your journey, um, talking about creating. The focus is creating your purpose, understanding why this work is important to you, and what is that true north star for you as a DEIB practitioner. Oftentimes, we've talked about on this call that this work is not just your 9 to 5, right, Andre? This is not a hat you take off. This is something that is a part of who you are. It is a value you carry with you everywhere you go. It's the way you act. It's the way you behave everywhere you go. So, what is that purpose for you? And how do you start to bring that purpose to life within the organizations that you support? The third piece, the third of the program, is getting ready to grow. So, what are some of the goals? Identifying those goals, those next steps for you on your own DIB journey, as well as start thinking about the journey for the organization that you're supporting today. Okay, and what are the goals that you can set for yourself and those the organization as you think about that. And then we talk about five quick tips for success as you step into this work, as well as what do you need to do to get started. So those are kind of the 5 steps as we think about this DEIB accelerated program, and we'll walk through some of this for you. But it's not just this. Here's your handbook. Complete your handbook. You're done, right? But really, I think the power of this is you get to tap into Andre and I, and really start to understand or pick our brains about what it is to be a DIB leader and practitioner in this space, um, as well as so you get some coaching time with us, but as well as what we ask you to do as part of this program is to bring your own problem, issue that you are seeing within your organization, right? That you want to create a strategy, a roadmap around. And so for some people, it may be, Laura and Andre, we need to create a dashboard. And it's not just the creation of a dashboard, but it's also the creation of the communication, the rollout, the plan of that roadmap for the dashboard itself. So through this program, not only are you working on growing your own self, but now we are also helping you with one particular problem that you see in your organization to bring that to fruition.
Yep. Yeah, I really like that, Lore, because a lot of times when I've gone to workshops or I've gone to uh, needless to say, trainings, I actually don't leave knowing how to do anything. Or the problem that I have is still the problem that I brought is
Yeah.
still the problem that I have. And so, um, being able to apply this in a real world, hands on, practical application
Yeah.
is vital to developing those skills, right? So
Yeah.
I can practice in a silo, but until I apply that skill in a real life world situation where I'm actually trying to solve a problem, it won't stick.
And on the along those lines, I think what some people might be thinking is, yeah, why can't I just go to a white paper, right? Or why can't I just go to one of the many other free diversity websites out there and download something on best practices around, I'm gonna make this up, employee resource groups, right? Um, you can, you certainly can, and I will say that I've done that especially early on in my career. I've done that too. So there's nothing wrong with that. The challenge becomes, does that model of an ERG, since I use that as an example, does that model that you downloaded, that you looked at a white paper, you looked at a best practice, does that truly work within your organization? And how do you tweak it to make it work in your organization? Right? Because I've seen employee resource groups where it's led by high level leaders. I've seen employee resource groups that are led by your frontline staff and your hourly staff. I've seen employee resource groups that are a mix of the two. You
Mhm.
know, so if there's a mix of the two, how do you make sure that you take away the power dynamic, right? Because if you have the VP of marketing that's leading your Black African American ERG with your frontline salesperson who has less quote unquote authority or power in that organization, how do you do away with that uh, power dynamic so that there is some equal ground, if you will? So that's the
Yeah.
difference to me of what we can offer through this program and our support versus someone that can go out and download a best practice or a white paper.
Yep. And to be honest, if you want those, we can give them to you.
Yep.
We've got those. However, our methodology is really more about it's even bigger than teaching people to fish. Is how do you define your own lake? How do
Mm-hmm.
you how do you nurture the fish in your own pond, right?
Yep.
So a bit more than just teaching people to fish, but really how do you create that environment that that your fish can thrive in, so when you do go to fish, you got something to work with, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. All right. So let's jump in a little bit into some of these pages that of the workbook that we have you work through, right? So we talk a little bit about that there isn't a one size fits all. We all need a little coffee to accelerate our day, so that's why the coffee is there. I've used this quote in the past: "Be the pebble that causes the ripple." A little bit of a twist to the ripple idea, right? Because instead of just being a ripple, why don't you cause the ripple to happen? So be the igniter. Um, this part is really where the work starts, defining your purpose in this work. Why do you want to do this work? Why is this important to you? These are the fundamental questions we believe will help you keep yourself accountable and you on the right path, right? So what are your core values? What are some of the core values to you that help you do this work? Why is this work important to you? So, Andre, you know, um, to me, this is about the values and the motivation for me is that I reflect on my early upbringings and even in through high school, right? And my people's history was never covered, or maybe it was covered, but it was covered like one day, one class out of 10th grade civics during the Vietnam War. That was all I got. And for me, I never saw um, authors of color until my freshman year in college. I never read him, right? The only thing, well, I did. So, like as excerpts of Uncle Tom's Cabin,
Huck Finn.
or real short poems, or Frederick Douglass's one writing, and that was it. And it wasn't until college, my senior year or my freshman year in college, where I was doing this. I think it was called freshman symposium, and it was all authors of color, right? And I'm like, where the heck was I?
Yep.
And so for me, that's what kind of is motivating me, is to help build this world where kids don't have to wait till freshman year in college to be able to be introduced to these authors and to concepts and ideas that are well alive and thriving in our in our society, but have just been, I don't want to say ignored, but left out of the mainstream curriculum.
Yep. Yep.
What about
And when
you? I mean, to you, what's your driving? What's your experience and how you got into this?
Yeah, so when I did this exercise in the workbook, the thing that stood out for me was that I want, I want, and I have.
Mm-hmm.
And degrees are a little bit different in those, but to I want to have core values,
Yeah.
and I want to use those core values when I'm in ambiguous situations,
Mm.
right? And so, there are, and it really is the difference between, parents asking or adults asking young people, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'm grown up today and I don't know, right? I still don't know. But
Yes.
when we ask the question, what kind of person do you want to be?
Yeah.
That requires a different kind of response. And so I would say the same thing with the I like this values clarification exercise because it asks the question, or it begs the answer to the question, when you don't know what to do, or when things get hard, when you're meeting adversity, what kind of person are you going to be?
Yeah.
And that's something that I'm striving to continually answer. And that part of the accelerator really helped me to peek into my own psychology around that.
Yeah.
Because if I want to be a freedom fighter, then that means, or I want justice, or I want equality, then that means I want it for the people who are my opposites. I
Yeah.
want it for the people who would might be perceived as my enemies, right? So I want for them what I want for me as much as I want it for me.
Yeah.
And that values clarification exercise really helped me to recognize that that's my driving force. And so
Yeah.
I'm going to try to be kind even to those people who are not kind to me, not because of them, but because it's my value.
Yeah.
And
And
so
that leads you this perfectly into that positive future piece, right? What does that future look like? And that's the third step of this self discovery, if you will, is to you, what is that positive? What's that future look like? If you, after at the end of the day, your values, your motivation comes to fruition, and it's true, and the work that you do, that you are trying to do in the DIB space comes true, what does that positive future look like? What does it taste like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? Right?
yeah,
Because we've got to pull on all of those senses. And the final piece is, what role do you think you play? And what role do you believe you want to play in this? And some people, might go through this and say, you know what, um, I'm good with playing a supporter role. I'm good with waiting and saying, people telling me, hey, why don't you go do this? Hey, why don't you go do that? Right? And for some, it's how do I help shape that future? And those are the people who are stepping into DEIB type of roles, and shaping that future for others as well. So that's it's not just a worksheet. We go through this as part of your coaching and help you think through what does this mean to you, um, and really help you define that true north for you as you do the DEIB work within your own organization, but also your life, your journey. We've often talked about this, that it's not just about that 9 to 5. So that's why this particular piece is important. We believe is important as you think about the advancing DEIB. And so once you kind of identify that, we help you write your um, clarification for you about what makes this work important for you, and then helping you. The next step is helping you grow or set up those goals, right? So the grow stands for something, just like everything else in this world. It's an acronym for something. The G stands for goals. What would you like to achieve? Again, both personally in your life, personal journey around DEIB, but and that again, this is why we have you bring in that organizational issue or problem you want to solve, right? And so, what would you like to achieve in your own personal journey around DEIB? But what would you like to achieve in this particular problem you want to solve? What is the current reality or situation in this particular your journey, as well as this particular problem you want to solve? What are the options you have? Maybe, for the problem you want to solve, let's keep using that ERG example, right, that we kicked off with. Maybe the opportunity or the options you have here is we can start one, or we can start 10, or maybe we're not ready, right? And let's explore how do I sell that to people first, that idea of ERGs. So, what are those options? And let's weigh out those options and help you figure out what is the right option for you. And then the last piece is what will you do? What are those next critical steps in the next short 5 months, 6 months, right? That you can start doing to get you on this journey, advance on this journey faster. So I will pause there. Andre, how does
Yeah.
the grow work for you?
I really like. So I'm a fan of mnemonic devices, right? So it just helped me remember uh, things more effectively. But I really like this grow model because not only is the metaphor, I think, a sound one because we're
Hmm.
constantly growing and developing. Um, but I think the tool is a helpful one again because it can show people where we currently are and what we're moving towards. And so, yeah, when I participated in that activity, I found it to be really helpful and profound.
Yeah. I think this is where people, and again, that this is why we ask you to bring in that problem or that issue in from the organization, right? Because there's your own personal growth, and I've talked to some people who, uh, um, talked about, I just want to step into DEIB work. So what does that mean? What does that even look like, right? What does that mean for you? Uh, well, I don't know, but I just want to. I've been tapped. I've been asked. I've been voluntold, and so I just want to do the DIB work. Okay, so let's explore what that means to you first. That's why we take you through that first few pieces about your self exploration, but then setting up these goals and this grow methodology for you, your personal growth, as well as the organization. And that's where the importance of bringing that issue in, right? And through the coaching and through the work with your colleague, with us, uh, you'll get support in each of those steps. So that's why it's important for us to set these goals,
Yeah.
because um, and again, these pages are simply there for you to start uh, putting down notes, and as we go through the coaching sessions together, for you to start to identify and do your own work there. And then we talk about these tips for success. And the first one for me is don't ever do this work alone. Even when you feel like you're alone within the organization, you're never alone, right? Whether it is outside of the organization, outside of that function in which you report to, there's always people that are going to be willing to help you and learn and grow and think through those problem issues that you are seeing. Um, there are sometimes people you might not even think of, and we call it co-collaborators in this work. And I've seen, I remember in one organization where there was a physician who they came off as stoic, uninterested, um, and not and not a believer, if you will, in this work, right? Uh, but I came to find out later through, and it was through helping this physician understand the tie between DEIB and the work that this physician was responsible for,
Mm.
right? And through that, that's when I gained a co collaborator through helping make that tie. And no longer was this physician the stoic, uninterested, but now this physician was a real champion and collaborator because they saw the value. And so now I've just gained another person to support me, that I'm no longer doing this work alone, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why it's important for us to think about don't do this work alone, because there's going to be people where you sometimes might not expect it.
Yep. And isolation breeds a certain amount of inaccuracies, right?
Hmm.
So, we believe what we want to believe, and oftentimes we tell ourselves what is truth. But until we're in partnership with folks who can hold up that mirror and
Yep.
say, Andre, this is what you really look like, or we have allies or best practices that we can lean upon, um, then then that's when we get out of our own echo chamber and actually can move forward in an organization.
Yep. The second tip for success here is celebrate the wins no matter how small, right? And I think, I've been in situations where I don't feel like it's moving at all. And I am pretty sure there's others out there right now, today, who are doing this work who feel like I can't make this thing move at all. But if I reflect on it, I've gained little wins along the way to get me to where I am today, right? So, I mean, even just the fact that your organizations are putting you and or someone into these roles, that's a little win, right? That you've been given some time to do this work, that's a little win. That you've been able to build into the, and I'm just making this up, new employee orientation, a 30-minute piece on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. That's a
But I
little
wanted
win.
an hour. It deserves a half a day. It should be a 3-day retreat. And you mean I only have a half an hour?
Yeah, it's a little win, right? And so those are, you've got to recognize that this journey is so long. We've been doing this for 20 years, and oftentimes we, privately, and now I'm sharing our private conversations with everybody, but we've talked about, have we really been effective in this space as a whole, as an industry, DEIB industry, right? Practitioners across the nation. Uh, when we look back, have we made any dents in this work as an industry? Um, and sometimes it feels like you're not. But look at the number of people who are doing this work now versus when we first started.
Yep.
you know?
And it's interesting because you've as a practitioner, I oftentimes feel the urgency of now,
Yeah.
right? And so I want to respond to that sense of urgency, but I have to measure that with pacing, right? The pace of change.
Yes.
And so, I oftentimes use the metaphor or the word story that this is really a marathon,
Hmm.
and your job is to not miss the handoff, right? That our jobs as practitioners is to run whatever kind of race we're in, to do our leg, do
Yep.
our best, and not miss that handoff. And so, which means you have to be vigilant, you have to be all of these things, but you also have to recognize that the race may not be finished with you, because the race did not start with you.
Correct.
You are
Correct.
picking up a baton,
Correct.
and your job is to hand it off, right?
That's why it's important for the first few pages and that reflection into self, right? And what is your role? Are you second leg, third leg, right, of that race? And how do you carry that race on so you don't miss that handoff?
Yep, 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 yep. So
That
no,
that
I
is
really,
important. That third
yeah, I
tip
really
is,
like this part of the
yeah,
accelerator.
it's okay to take a break and breathe.
Yep. That's what we have heroes and holidays for.
That works. That's a time to breathe. And that's a little win, right?
It's a little win.
Yeah. But oftentimes, in my career, there's been times where, because of the challenge of not seeing any wins, um, I feel like, oh, I give up. But it's those times where it's okay to feel like you give up, but don't give up. It's okay to take a breather. It's okay to rest for a little bit, but never give up. Right? I saw a poster, something along those lines one time, where it's okay to rest, but don't give up. And I think
Yep.
that's so important in this work, and to remind people who are doing this work that you deserve to take a rest. You deserve to take a breather. And if you've done this work right, right? The number one thing we talked about here in the tip is don't do this work alone.
Yep.
Find those collaborators. Find those partners in this work with you, even though they're not in your on your team. How do you rely on those others when you do feel like you need to take a breather?
Yep.
And
And,
some
and that's not a sign of
no,
weakness, right? It is actually, I mean, self-care, both in a professional sense as well as a personal sense,
yeah,
is intelligence. It is smart to take care of yourself. It is smart to do those things, because if we don't, we're going to do it anyway, but then we call it quiet quitting, right?
and we've heard a lot about burnout too, right?
And burnout, right? So, if you're not um, if you're not doing well, then I'm not doing well. I need you to do well, so that I can do well,
Yeah.
right? And that means sometimes taking that extra time.
That fourth tip is knowing that it's okay that you do not have all the answers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oftentimes, people in these roles, are expected to have the answers to everything diversity, inclusion, equity, inclusion, and belonging related, or even things that may seem tangential to DEIB, that you should have the answers to this.
What,
uh,
Andre? What do Laura? What do you think about this, that, or the other? Like, that's not real. I'm not responsible for that. But if you want to know, I'll tell you.
you do not have to have all the answers, right? Because that's the whole beauty for me. The whole beauty of this work is inclusion. How do you
Yep.
find answers from the collective, from the voices? And oftentimes, that's the best answer to the problem. than what's coming out of here, because what's coming out of here there's bias with it. There's a single perspective to it, right? And it's built on my perspective, my experiences with that particular issue, which is riddled with bias, which is riddled with my own personal experiences. So it may not be the perfect or right solution. Don't have to be perfect. The right solution for us to move forward with. So it's okay to not know the answers. It's okay to lean on others to help you explore and find those answers. And sometimes DIB practitioners either forget that or feel the pressure to be the answer for everything. I'll give you an example. There was, oh goodness, early on in my career, right? And there was this issue, and I'm stalling because I'm trying to find the right way to say it so I don't give away the
Oh yeah.
organization.
Oh, I was gonna say,
You know what I'm
just say
saying?
it. But then, no, if you're gonna give away something, don't no, because
Don't,
my lawyers is already busy.
right. I don't want to out this organization. So that's what I'm trying to figure out here.
Let's
Um,
call it. Let's call it. Apple. No, oh, no, no. That's
no,
a
no, no.
company.
Don't say
No, no,
that.
no. No, I was like, that's a company. You know, I was like pineapple. You know, organization.
For the record, I have never worked for and or consulted with Apple
Yes, or pineapple.
or
Yeah,
Pineapple.
yeah. No. Yeah.
All right. So, um, gosh. So this organization that I had supported in the past had run into some potential.
You're you're better than a Netflix thing because I'm hanging on every word. Like, ooh, this is getting good.
Some
Was it
potential political
opportunity for
issues. How about
development
that?
or
What's that?
what was it?
Some political issues, news related, that they may or they. So during the recent during the recent pandemic.
This is hard stuff to talk about this stuff without like
Outing, yes,
outing stuff.
exactly. So let's just say this: there was a organization that I supported in the past that were going to do some marketing pieces.
Oh, oh, I know what you're about to say.
Yes,
Yes.
that were going to do some marketing pieces that could have gotten them into some deep trouble. And instead of me putting my foot down and saying, you cannot do that, uh, I did not have all the answers, but was willing to explore it with them because I told them this could be troublesome. So we explored some answers, potential answers to the marketing issue they were going to roll out, and they decided to put a pause on it and go a different route to avoid any potential social
Blowback.
flack. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And but
That
and
was hard, man.
this is where like practitioners need to be really mindful of because um so, so, so and I usually talk about this with supervisors and managers too,
Hmm.
right? So it's easy punish
Yeah,
to punish an employee, right? And I know we don't like to talk about it like that, but that's actually what happens, right? So when I throw the book at somebody, I'm aiming to punish them. I'm not trying to develop them.
yeah,
Development takes a whole nother set of strategies,
yeah.
right? The same with this DEI space. A lot of times organizations want the quick fix. So they say, I want you to tell me if this is right, yes or no. And what we're saying as practitioners is, I can do that, but to better serve you, let's have a conversation so that next time you don't have to ask me if this is the right or wrong thing to do, because you'll have a mindset, a template, if
Correct.
you will, so that you can make those decisions on your own. I remember you talking about that situation. And the funny thing is, it should have never had to come to us, because there were other leaders who should have had a mindset that, right, but we could play woulda, coulda, shouldas
Yep.
all
Yep.
day. And that's not helpful. But what is helpful is making sure that in our role, we help build capacities for the answers.
Yep.
So they don't have to keep coming to us for the answers. They can start to build capacities and share thoughts with us about how, what we should be doing, or how might this come across, or whatever. And just being able to ask the question is a level of intelligence and humility that a lot of leaders don't have. And so as a diversity practitioner, we have to cultivate that around us so that people feel comfortable to be vulnerable and
Correct.
to be humble, and coming to us to have open dialogue and conversations.
And so the last piece of this is going back to, and we alluded to this earlier, is remembering your North Star, your values, your purpose, why you are doing this work, right? I've leaned on this many times, where there's been times in my career where I've said, oh, this is so much. Can I just go do something? Can I just go do HR? Can I just go be an HR business partner and or a CHRO somewhere one day, and or a VP of HR, and just do that work, that particular work with a DEI lens on. And so I don't have to lead the DEI work. But then when I think about my purpose, it keeps pulling me back into this DEIB space, right? That no, I can do that, but eventually I'm going to come back to this because of that true North Star, because it's who I am, you know? Um, and so to me, that's why that sometimes when you need to take a break, this tip for success is so important.
Yeah, yeah. And this is at the root of the accelerator, right?
Yeah.
It's about accelerating you as a practitioner to be able to hold on. And we talk about this often offline,
Hmm.
that is it better to be right or to be effective? And what we're hoping is that you don't have to make those two decisions, but you could actually be both.
Yeah.
That you could do the right thing and be effective when you're true to your North Star. And I know our time is fleeting. Man, these conversations go so fast, Lord.
Yeah, it does. And so I think, again, that is just a teaser of the accelerator. We'll get you a QR code to be able to download that and be able to access those pages. And you can start to use that first few pages as a tool for yourself. And if you decide, you know what, Laura and Andre, would love to have your help to think through this. We're here for you. You already have a start in this particular piece, this around the accelerator program. What we go do beyond that, um, is really helping you, again, the coaching sessions, the extra learning curriculum that you get with the accelerator program, the um, hyper focus on one particular issue that you bring into the program. Those are the key pieces that, and I think Andre, you alluded to this, is we teach you how to be effective in that space. We don't just tell you what to do. Here's a white paper, go do it, or here's a best practice, go do it. We help you think through, this is the best practice, but how does that work within my organization? Where is the organization on that continuum, and how do I plug it in to help them be successful within that organization, right? And so that's the value of the accelerator program, and then you can take those learnings and apply it to so many other things. Because we got dive into uh, ad card using the ad card model and the 4-H model you talked about earlier in the beginning of this conversation, and applying that into as a change leader in the institution. We talk about why data is important and have people come in and talk about the use of data and being able to disaggregate data and why do you need to start to build a dashboard and what does that tell you, right? So there's so many other pieces about the program that will help, but it is really depending on or focused on where you are, your own journey, your own growth, and then how can you use that to help develop your organization.
So I want to say as we close, just really grateful for the conversation. We've had a number of people sign up for a newsletter via our website. So
Mm-hmm.
DEIB.com, DEIBpartners.com. Look forward to seeing you in that space. And we'll see you next week as we continue these conversations. Thanks, Laura.